And I think what the problem is that if we are only thinking of getting money and material wealth at the expense of peace, then we begin to have a real disconnect. So what we're seeing in the world today is we're seeing the last, since the war, there has been the Second World War and the rise of, the European states, and then laterally the rise of China, and now India becoming a global power. What we see is the main problem has been the concentration of wealth in fewer and fewer hands. In the 70s, there was more what we might call redistributive justice. There was a redistribution that went from people's taxes to helping people who didn't have work, who didn't have jobs. By the mid-1980s, the wages were not rising. They were stagnant in the West, and prices kept rising. And so slowly in the Western states, the middle class started to move down. Now, simultaneously in the 90s, early 90s, with the new economic reform process, there was initially new opportunities in India, new wealth creation opportunities.
You were the beneficiaries in a way of
and in India, we were the beneficiaries of a new way, except that the problem is whenever the marketplace grows and expands to so-called give to more people, the pie gets divided more unfairly and skewed in favor of the rich. So what we have now is we have 25 families in the world that control 50% of the world's wealth. Right? So we have got to a level in India, we have for the first time billionaires who are controlling huge chunks of the Indian economy, commensurate to millions and millions of people who have no wealth. So because we're creating those kinds of structures, poverty, civil unrest, all you have to do is go to rural areas and see the conflicts in the rural areas. One of the conflicts that stands out so much in my mind is visiting some displaced people, Adivasi people, from the Narmada Valley, which is close to here. And Maharashtra has been a beneficiary of that power project, the Narmada dams. Those tribals that were displaced 5 years later, in their new location, are now being redisplaced. Okay, so what you find with Adivasi communities is in the space of one generation, 25 years, they may be displaced as many times as 5 times, where they start from scratch. Now, if there's no way that people can live peacefully with a basic income, a basic livelihood, if they're constantly being displaced. 60 million people have been displaced since independence, mostly indigenous people in India. So these are the consequences of the wealth generation. These are not just because of bad government policies. These are as a result of certain economic structures. And so if I am a student and I want to get a job, and I'm studying law, and I want to join the mining company, and I've got to realize that that mining company may be displacing the indigenous communities and may be creating civil unrest. And it may be that my children may have a house and a car, but they may have absolutely no peace. Now, my decision is, do I want to live in a society that is completely without peace?
But I hear you when you say that, there is a small group of people, concentrated wealth, and trickle down doesn't happen. But I think the current discourse is that somebody has to pay for this, and there is a small price when we build a highway to go through a jungle, and there'll be a corridor. There has to be somebody who has to foot the bill, and therefore, as we are all going on a development path and making our countries great again and all, we can't help but have some side effects and some damaging effects. That's what basically we're trying to say, that okay, we minimize those damages, but we plan to link the rivers and do all of that. So I think the broad thrust of development that we are all in, and the fact that it's creating a lot of violence, what do you feel about that? How does one deal with that kind of, everybody wants development, everybody wants the best they can, and they really believe that this current way will redeem them, there will be that destination. So
see, what is important is not just to follow the herd. I think if one really believes that you want peace, if you really choose peace, as we talked about, and want to communicate peacefully and want to do conflict resolution, if you choose that, if you don't want to choose that, that's a different thing. But if you want to choose it, then you need to choose to disengage from the violence of an economic system which is not promoting the most marginalized in that system. You know, Gandhi gave the talisman to think whenever you're thinking about what steps to take, you think of the poorest man or woman you have ever met in your life, and it is that person's plight or that person's situation on which you must base your decisions. That is essential to an inclusive society. Inclusion is the way of peace. That is the way. Now, if we want to exclude communities, caste groups, women, then we're going to have a violent society.
very good. They'll always come back in some way as
they'll come back in
resisting.
some way. People don't just sit mum.
Right.
They respond because they need to survive. And they respond. So even though we go back to those displaced Narmada people, these what one would call economic refugees within India, these people will obviously not create secure systems. They will create a situation where the state and companies need to come into some way to keep security, because it won't be human security. And human security is the most basic security, and that coincides with peace.